Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. This is Gemini Brett and Jogee here, presenting live for those of you who are witnessing in real time at YouTube, the first episode of our new StarryTelling podcast with Gemini and Jogee. I will say that there in the future will be like beautiful music by Jogee himself, and likely some, kind of talk about what this thing is. More of a professional vision, I guess, to bring you into the StarryTelling podcast. But I was really excited to launch the ship today or earlier, and here we are. And I decided to go live so we could make this thing more real, although we will have a audio version of the podcast, which won't have anything that you are hearing right now. It will start a little bit more like, Jogee, how in the heavens are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to launch this ship with you, this new version of the StarryTelling podcast. And me here in the Bay Area of California, and you a few hours ahead as the Earth spins.
Right on your solar return too.
Toronto. Yeah, my solar return. And so that's, I really wanted to get this first episode launched before the Earth and the sun realigned the way they were when I was born. And I changed into an 11th house profection year and all that, although that really makes sense for a podcast too. So we actually attempted the recording of episode 1 last week, where Jogee and I kind of introduced ourselves. And then we realized in the end, like, yeah, that's interesting, but is it? Maybe we should just start with some content and we could retrograde back to the introductions another time. And we had planned from the get that our first true episode would be addressing this riddle, this mystery, this question: what is astrology?
And probably not answering it, just addressing it.
Or attempting to answer it in ways. Yeah, so it's fun, I think, in that regard, to also be speaking at solar return time. If you are brand new to astrology, know that that is astro speak for birthday. But it's also can be kind of different, because according to the Pope Emperor calendar that most folks employ today, called Gregorian, right? I was born on October 24th, which is tomorrow, as we are recording this on October 23rd, 2021. And yet the astronomical truth of what a year is, at least from our current astronomical point of view, is one orbit of the sun by the Earth. And so on the day of your birth every year, annual Anu, being the sun, the Earth and the sun are directionally aligned, and we can say seasonally aligned as well as they were in the moment of your birth. That being said, for folks especially like you, Jogee, who have relocated. I mean, I'm one, like, I relocated from the East Coast of the United States in Boston, and now I've lived in the Bay Area of California. I've lived in the West Coast for most of my life. But you relocated from the Southern Hemisphere in Brazil to the Northern Hemisphere in Canada, like quite a seasonal reversal in that way, right? So I think there's a couple of different ways to look at what is a birthday, what is the zodiac, what is this Earth-Sun arrangement. But for those of you who are new to astrology, I mean, you might be wondering why the heck your solar return often happens, right? So the sun in the same exact degree and arc minutes of a degree of the zodiac as it was when you were born, why that often aligns differently than your calendar birthday, right? So tomorrow will be when mom calls me. And yet today is the day that I will celebrate. Actually, it's tonight when the Earth and the sun are completely realigned. And there's many techniques where we use where that will kind of determine much of the nature of the year to come.
Nice. Are you doing anything special at the exact time?
I had these plans, but they were all kind of sky-based, because I have this really cool thing this year where the moon is right at my ascendant, in my solar return moment, which is
Nice.
8:30-ish p.m. tonight. And then also here in California, it wouldn't be true in my birthplace of Boston, but here in California, in my kind of exact solar return moment, the moon is rising in the east.
Oh, wow.
So I was really excited to like get out and just drink some moonrise, but we are having our first rain, like literally for all of the Gregorian calendar year here in California. There's a significant drought. And so I'm definitely celebrating that, but also a tiny bit sad that I won't see the moonrise. I will, of course, sit and kind of set intentions for the year to come. See what old withered fruit is ready to be offered to the compost pile where it can be transmuted into dark soil for the seeds of the year and such. I also, every solar return year of the last many years, rain or shine, I'm out hiking and just kind of observing what the earth does in the kind of season of my becoming.
Right.
So I think one answer to what is astrology, and kind of one of my go-to answers, though also at least half of my practice contradicts, is that astrology is the truth that, well, I'll start this way. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. Now that might apply universally, because maybe it also speaks for parts of natures that I can't and never will be able to see. But part of that, right, part of the idea that astrology is the poetic breath of nature is this: astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings. Right. And so if I'm in a debate with like a rationalist, materialist, so-called scientist in our day and age, which happens, right? And they're open-minded and open-hearted enough to have a conversation about what is astrology, rather than just shaming me for practicing some archaic, superstitious thing of the past, as they often are wont to do. I'll start there. Astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings.
Right.
And many will go to like the phases of the moon and the way that it affects the tides of Earth. And we, like our planet, is 70% plus water, and that we must have tides too. And I think it's a cool place to go, but I just start with day and night.
Totally. And I think that also, like, when we go straight to the moon, it makes it harder for especially skeptics to even consider the other planets, because, like, yes, the moon is pretty easy to kind of like wrap your brain around, but then like how could possibly Saturn, or Pluto even, who's like super far, do something? But yeah. Right.
And like proximity and the need for a mechanism, right? But if we start with Earth, Sun, right, which, like you're saying, it doesn't work outside of sun sign astrology, right? And you and I are very outside of sun sign astrology. But if we start there, just to offer some support for this idea that astronomical cycles influence our energetic experience as earthlings, right? I start with day and night, like even before the seasons. Like if you want to experience seasons, you need a year. Right. And again, like we're going to have to address the difficulty with the seasonal approach. The challenge of northern and southern hemisphere seasons are completely opposed.
And actually, this is a thing that I did want to talk about, because I've had the experience of being in both the southern and the northern hemisphere. But I was just thinking about this the other day, and I realized that like even though the seasons don't necessarily align, the feeling is very similar. Like when you're in the northern hemisphere, you dread the winter because it's too cold. But then you're in the southern hemisphere, you dread the summer because it's way too hot. So you still have that that sort of vibe is very similar.
I love it. And I will say it depends on, what latitude you are, the local kind of bioregion, right? So being in Brazil in the jungle, it's a different story than if you're in the southern hemisphere, like closer to the Arctic somewhere, or the mountains of Chile or whatever, right? And even there, we're also going to have to address some issues with, northern hemisphere alone. Like, what is the difference between the tropics and the temperates? What if you're north of the Arctic Circle, et cetera, right? So there's a lot of challenges to the seasonal thing. But, let's rewind: day and night.
Yes.
Right. So no rationalist or anyone on earth could argue, if they are coming to this with an open mind, that we have a different energetic experience at 3 a.m. than we do at 3 p.m. Right? And the flowers open to receive the light and they close at night to dream and rest. And so should we. Well, most of us are wired that way. Some of us are very nightly beings. I'm kind of one of those. But, that is, at least according to the modern astronomical worldview, the sun is rising and setting because Earth spins. This is very much an astronomical cycle that incredibly influences our energetic experience as Earthlings. And unlike the seasons, we don't need to live a year to experience it. You need to live a day. And the next day it happens. And the next. Now, day by day, we're also having changes in light, right? So here we are on October 23rd in the Northern Hemisphere, autumn, and the sun is falling in the sky. And the nights are growing longer and days are growing shorter. Of course, the opposite is true in the Southern Hemisphere right now. And that's the whole thing, right? So I actually like to start with my clients, like I had a session earlier. It was just fun. I did a session today on my solar return, and the client was also born on October 24th, as I was, and is also experiencing solar return on October 23rd. In fact, her solar return moment happened in the midst of our session.
That's pretty magical.
Yeah. And I was speaking with her about how she was born in this autumn of the year. She was born in the Northern Hemisphere as well. But in the springtime of the day, she was born with the sun just about to rise, which in the kind of daily flow would be more like just the end of the winter. Right. And that sunrise is like spring, and midday is like summer, and sunset is like autumn, and midnight is like winter. Right. So we can see that even in these two primary astronomical expressions of time, which are one, day, Earth spinning on her axis, and two, year, Earth orbiting the sun. Right. That the sun itself can speak to us. So, I was like, okay, imagine this cold day in Detroit. This is where she was born. And, the leaves are bright colors, the ones that are still on the branches. Many of them are on the ground, and there's a frost in the air, but the sun is about to rise and the birds sing of the coming light. I really love to bring clients into that kind of energetic, seasonal light expression of their birth moment to begin with, right? But then we get to, well, I'm going to take it back to me. So I'm not speaking so much about somebody else, but like if I'm talking to me, it's like, oh, it's an hour and a half after the sunset, right? This is like the fall of the year, the fall of the day, going into the winter realms, this kind of thing, and da-da-da-da. And then I'm going to say, and you are a child of Mercury. For Gemini was on the rise when you were born. Nice. In the poetic language of old, Mercury is the lord of your horoscopos, your hour marker. He is the steersman of your iacos, the rudder of your boat, right? Now, there really is nothing astronomical in that. Or like right now, I wanted to start while I'm still in the last hours of a 10th house annual profection, this wonderful Hellenistic and ancient timing technique that Jogee and I both love and utilize. And I will move in my solar return moment this evening from a 10th house Jupiter time lord year into an 11th house Mars time lord year. And while that's all really beautiful, and the truth is that it changes yearly, well, a year is an astronomical thing. But even the idea that my 10th house, and there's a lot of different opinions of where that is, frankly, right, but is from a traditional point of view, Pisces, and from traditionally point of view, that's Jupiter's nocturnal sign. And I'll be moving as the year turns into Aries, and that this is Mars's sign, and right. So like all of these things like dispositorship, they're really in a sense beyond like astronomical cycle.
Right.
And we can find it there. And that's a huge part of my own devotion, my own work. I like to say that astrology, again, is the poetic breath of nature. And when we re-nature astrology, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use.
Right.
However, that's like akin to this really kind of, I think, overly romanticized image that all these rules of our craft kind of came in through trial and error, and people experiencing nature in the heavens and telling us what it is for the moon to be carrying the light of Venus to Jupiter, whatever it may be, simply by experiencing and witnessing the world. And I'm not sure there's enough time that it's expired in the universe for that to have gone down, let alone like as long as conscious, humankind has been tracking the heavens. What do you think?
I don't know. I was actually going to ask you a question just following that up. So I think that in the train of thought that we're going, can we say that astrology is not necessarily astronomy? That was kind of like the question that I had.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. There's this cool thing that even some astronomers who genuinely like the kind of general astronomy teaching these days is that astrology is a bunch of nonsense, right? Although those scientists won't have a scientific look. I mean, I didn't come to astrology until pretty late in the game, and we'll get to that when we do an introduction podcast sometime down the road. But, because I was a good student in science class, and I didn't completely buy into the rap that astrology is utter nonsense, but I never really took a look until pretty late in my life. Well, anyway, later in my life than many do, certainly you. But even in some of the astronomy texts, you'll get this thing about how astronomy is the child of astrology.
Right. And I think that's also like a really important question to ask. If we're asking what is astrology, I think we also have to ask what is astronomy in the first place.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I'll share with what I believe. And also why, though I love the meme I saw yesterday, which is Darth Vader telling Luke that I am your father, and Darth Vader was labeled astrology and Luke astronomy. So astrology was telling astronomy it is its father, and then Luke yelling no, right? Like I love that image. So I was like on like an astronomer's thing. But I also have kind of found that I don't know that that's necessarily true, right? So what is astronomy? What is astrology? Because if we want to ask which came first, we better know which thing is a chicken and which thing is an egg.
Right.
And then we might find the same conundrum of what came first, the chicken or the egg too. For me, the way that I've come to define astronomy, and a lot of this is through my study of the quadrivium, which is number. Like you and I, one of the ways that we first bonded and will continue to is that we both also love music and musical harmony. And traditionally, harmony is a sister science to astronomy. Okay. But astronomy, like harmony, has two sides, and they are about quantity and quality. Right. So in the musical metaphor, I love this because I think it's easier for us to like maybe be with, which is, I'll say the difference between noise and sound. Okay. So this is all subjective. So let me define that. For me, noise is like something vibrating the medium. So when you ask that great riddle of if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? My answer is no.
Right.
My answer is yes, it makes a noise, right? Because something went crack and all the creaks and things that happen when trees fall in the woods, and the air was vibrated, and sound waves are flowing through the medium and all that. But if there's no ear to hear it, right, it doesn't make a sound. Now you could say, look, the nearby trees can hear, and that's fine, but then somebody's there to hear it, right? So if, I'm not saying this has to be a human being. It could be a squirrel runs. Totally. This morning I experienced a very mild earthquake, I think, and the dog went off, right? So now if we weren't here and nobody barked, right, did the earthquake make the house shake? So I think on one level there is this idea of noise, and it is this like quantity. You can take your ruler to it, right? There's frequency, there's amplitude, there's periodicity and all that, right, in the waves. But if there's no ear to hear it, it's not a sound, because I think that's actually what the incarnated being has to offer to spirit in general, right? So we could put a song in the radio that encourages your body to move and dance, and for me to like run away. Right? So a lot of that is just a personal thing. And sound, I feel, is a personal thing. It's a quality. So the noise is the quantity, the measurable, and the sound is the quality, rather the immeasurable, right? And that really astronomy is the noise. Astronomy is the quantity of the heavenly happenings. It is the measurable heavenly happening. So on this thing that we've come to call December 21st, 2020, I personally was in Sedona, Arizona, taking pictures with my camera, with my eyes, with my mind, with my heart of this very near conjunction of the gas giant gurus, Jupiter and Saturn.
Nice.
And it was a beautiful thing. And it has, as we know, like all sorts of astrological import, or at least we believe. I can say for sure that those two planets were right next to one another in the sky. Right. I could put a ruler to it. And the astronomers did and do, and it's great. And it shows up on my astrology software thanks to that, But how does that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction dance you? How does it dance me? Now I can look at my chart and say, okay, well, it was opposite my natal Saturn and square my sun Uranus, and it was in the ninth house and right? And it's going to be different for you. So I think astrology offers this wonderful gift, even more than musical harmony does. Now, musical harmony itself, or at least kind of like musical anthropology, can say, okay, this kind of noise or collection of noises, like this kind of music, is more likely to dance to this type of person who was raised in this culture, right, than this kind of person who was raised in a very different kind of musical heritage and tonality, et cetera, right? The natal chart, even more powerfully so, says, all right, this is where this cat's coming from. And so it is very likely that that noise of the astronomical alignment is going to be experienced in sound by this unique set of ears or this soul on earth in this way. Okay, so now very importantly, it's not actually about astronomy and astrology. Astrology is two things. Astrology is the quantity and the quality. The quality is not astrology, it is correspondences. The astronomy is the measurable quantity of the heavenly happenings. How they dance you or don't, that's the quality, somewhat immeasurable, that's correspondences. And astrology is the bridge between the measurable quantity astronomy and the immeasurable quality correspondences.
Right. But then are you talking about astrology as a science? Because just as you were talking about this too, and like, especially with the metaphor about the sound and everything, like you don't necessarily need a musician for there to be sound, but do you need an astrologer for there to be astrology? Or is astrology just the fact that you're out here in this world and experiencing the effects of planets moving or whatever that might be in the first place? Like, do you need an astrologer for there to be astrology?
That's a beautiful question, but then it also demands another definition of what is an astrologer.
What is an astrologer?
Right?
Yeah.
Because some people think, when I ask clients, for example, oh, you're an artist, right? And it's funny, sometimes I will ask things with a period instead of a question mark. And they're like, no. But then it turns out that they draw and they dance and they play but they just don't sell it in a gallery professionally.
Right.
And for some reason, like our, capitalistic consciousness has been tuned to the idea that if you're not making money from a thing and it's like the source of your livelihood, then you're not a thing.
Right.
Right. And so many believe that what astrologer means is somebody who is paid to read like natal charts or do elections or horary or other things we can speak about today. Right. I will say that an astrologer is one who is having a embodied, experiential, energetic witness of the heavenly happenings. That's actually not the way I would prefer to say that sentence, since its vernacular was not too tight.
Right.
But I think you understand what I'm saying. Like if you start tracking charts and if you start watching the moon wax and wane and move through the heavens, and know that that this could influence your energetic experience and that you're open to that, then you are an astrologer. Right. So let me actually come back to this. I'm going to rewind again, like what came first, astronomy or astrology? Now, if that's my definition of astrology, maybe astrology. I mean, I think there's this image again, and there's a significant truth that a lot of the astronomy, especially the early astronomy, was born out of our attempts to develop the astrological craft. When Venus has a significant northern latitude, what does it mean? Or like, actually, no. Why the heck is Venus so high? Right? Like, and then so we find out, and then how is that applied? Right. So
but I
much
think
of
we can even go a little bit further back than that, because like you were talking about, just like the idea of like the day cycle, or of like there's morning and there's night. I feel like even like or ancients, like they looked at that and they probably thought like, wait, what does it mean to have like a day and then have a night?
Yes. And maybe that's the birth of astrology. What does it mean? Right? Because before that, there's a question. Well, there's a truth that if you don't keep track, you're going to die.
Right.
Because a human being needs food. Right. And this is basically sun sign stuff, although it's smart to plant and harvest with the moon. Yeah. But even if you're a nomadic people, you're going to know when to get on the move, because the berries are that way, right? Or the herd is that way, based upon the seasons of the year. So, I mean, it's interesting to me. I'm often engaging with kind of rationalist scientists who are hating on astrology. And I want to kind of defend our craft from an astronomical point of view. That's one of the things I'm currently here to do, I feel. And you'll see this thing that astronomers say is like, oh, well, the ancients thought they knew about the stars, and they were really avid stargazers, because no TV. And so you wouldn't have to go too far to see why they would think you could kind of see gods and goddesses in the heaven and how these things are influencing, their lives. And it's like, or we could put all that bias aside and realize the very important truth that no astronomy, no food, and you die. And it's simply about Earth and sun, first and foremost, right now. Like I went out on a walk the other night with the dog, and I got to a place on a field where there's no lights. And suddenly I walked out of fake light and into moonlight. Now, a lot of people in the modern urban environment will actually never really experience that. The importance of some nights the moon is shining and it's like safe to go walk, and you're not going to, stub your toe or get robbed on the road or whatever. And some nights it is just dark and you probably want to stay at home for a week or two.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so even once we talk about like moon, right? Because like, let's say we're like a nomadic people, and we know that when the leaves turn this certain color in this place that we hang out in the summer, it's time to move, because this place is going to run out of food, and the next kind of food that we need for the next season is over yonder, right? Well, still, you can see the leaves turning and you got to move, but it's smarter to wait for, a big moon in the sky, like a late night moon, like when she's full, the week before, the week after, like, because it's just so much easier to travel by night. Or even if you're choosing only to travel by daylight, it's safer, right, from the predators and whatnot of the places in between that you don't know so well, right, when the night light's out there and keeping you kind of at least able to use your eyes in the middle of the night, right? So because a stargazer, if I go to Arizona, I go at new moon because I want to see the stars. But sometimes I'm there teaching at full moon or whatever, and it's like, I wish I could see the Milky Way, and I can't because the moon just ate the sky. But I can go in the silver light night hike, and you just experience like, it really matters. It's like really a thing. And so many humans today will be disconnected from that. And so I think many also astrologers today are missing that original connection to what I'll just call like embodied astronomy. Watching the truth that the sun sets in a different place on the horizon every year. And you can keep the calendar by that. Like I've met so many astrologers who aren't aware of that. Right. I mean, like not trying to be mean about it, but like that's a fact. Because we don't need to see that in a chart. You don't have to understand, how you would know it's what we call October because you've got a smartphone that tells you every moment you turn it on, which is too much throughout the day, et cetera. Right. So let me just like rewind. I'll say like, I think that really astronomy would have been the grandfather of astrology, because you've got to track the cycles to live. But then at some point, because you're tracking them so, I don't know, diligently, you're like really into it, you start noticing, wait, when the moon is with that star, my partner is screaming at me, or whatever it may be. Right. And you start like coming up with these sets of rules and delineations, right? Or even just sitting out under the amazement of the night sky, which was much more amazing before these bright city lights. It's hard to be in that space without asking why.
Right.
Right. And I think to your statement before, like in that questing is born. And then on one level, maybe what we call astrology, or I'll call correspondence, is the questing nature of astronomy. So I would say in many regards, like there is absolutely an astronomical truth to what we call astrology. Right now, most astrologers these days aren't hip to it. And that's one of my great devotions, is to bring not like astronomy class astronomy of solar system formation and the Big Bang and stuff to astrologers, but rather like, hey, remember the chart's not just a map of the soul, it's a map of the sky.
Right.
And if we get outside,
even to that, like the whole solar system formation thing, like that, as astrologers, that could also give us a lot of like really important information that we might be missing on if we're not really paying attention to it.
I agree. I think it's super interesting. I would never discourage somebody to go, like not go there, or the things that we get to see in telescopes, or a really wonderful one that I look forward to doing podcast episodes in the future with you about, is like how we send these probes these days to these planets.
Right.
And we're getting all this information, which kind of confirms things that we've said about them astrologically. Yeah. Like, so a just quick proof for that is the truth that because Mercury spins so slowly that if you're on Mercury, the day is longer than the year. This is also true on Venus, but unlike Venus, Mercury does not have atmosphere. And so what happens in Mercury is so much closer to the sun. What happens is this very slow spin, but fast rotation or orbit, arranges a situation on Mercury where half of the planet is like burning hot, right, and half of the planet is super cold. Like I've actually read that there's some depths of craters on Mercury's away from the sun side that are colder than Saturn. And that half hot, half cold thing feels really Gemini in the astrological vernacular, right? And so I guess, I mean, maybe the ancients were space traveling and all the stuff. How do we really know?
Yeah.
But from, what we're taught about how we were a couple thousand or a few thousand years ago, certainly we didn't understand that kind of hot and cold nature of Mercury. And there's plenty of visible experiences of Mercury, which kind of contributes to this idea that she is the both things in every way planet. But there is like a modern astronomical revelation. Also in the heliocentric solar system, while Venus is the closest planet to Earth, Venus also gets much further away than Mercury ever can. So on average, Mercury is the closest planet to Earth. And on average, Mercury is the closest planet to Pluto, right? And so in that way, Mercury really is like the messenger. So we get these new kind of astronomical revelations in modern astronomy, which is about the long telescope and focusing long ago and far away and sending out the probes and the robots to these cold places that maybe are confirming the astrological vernacular, and hopefully also can update them a bit. So yeah, I love that you would stop me there and say, look, it's not like the Big Bang doesn't matter. I mean, especially if it's true and we don't know. Mm-hmm. And I think we need a cosmology, but I'm very interested in helping astrologers know that you can step outside and you can see the chart in the sky. And when you learn to do this, then you can bring more of the sky into the chart. So when you're sitting at this in a client, it's not just a bunch of rules and math and equations or whatever, but because you've had a more personal, sentient, maybe even sensual and intimate experience of the quantity of the heavenly happenings, the astronomy, maybe you will have a more intimate experience of, and therefore expression of, the immeasurable the qualities. And that's so much of my personal kind of devotion to have a sky practice and teach that. And I've seen so many people really unfolding as astrologers as they reconnect to the heavens. And I can't tell you how often I see just these really poor assumptions about how the sky works and about what the ancients were seeing, right? Because there were no city lights does not mean you can see the sky every night, or that like...
You mean assumptions by astrologers or by other astronomers?
Mostly by astrologers, because others just don't even consider it, right? So, I mean, there are some, academics who are very much interested in the history of astrology. Like that's allowable in academic school these days. But it's rare to wish to understand what the ancient worldview and how these astrological rules came into play, unless you're an astrologer anyway. And many astrologers don't care, and that's totally okay, right? But many of us are on a pursuit of where does it come from? What have we lost through translations and the telephone game from one era to the next and all these things. And I know you have a very dear interest in ancient astrology and whatnot, as I do too. But I mean, like, so I'll be in like, the threads and just seeing people make really poor assumptions about how the sky works. And then I typically show a bunch of pictures using the technologies of our day, and it can be really helpful. So just to get back on track, I think in a way, the need for astronomical awareness to live a life, which was way more ramped up back in the day before like modern technology, including agriculture, but especially agriculture demands an astronomical awareness, right? That would lead to astrology. And then astrology would lead to the advent of so many models of astronomy. And I think this is really important too. Like, it's not like the telescopes aren't finding things that we can use astrologically. I mean, and some people are starting to work with the so-called dwarf planets like Ixion and Quaoar and Makemake and Haumea and, Sedna. And many are putting Eris on the chart now. But what about all of these so-called centaurs? What about these hundreds of thousands of named asteroids in the main belt? What about these like exoplanets and star systems far away? Right. What about these nebula that can't be seen with the naked eye? And what are these birthplace of stars? What do you do with that? I mean, eventually you could just have an astronomical, happening for every degree of the zodiac, and the chart just looks like a filled in circle. And so what are you going to do with that too? Right.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that is also really interesting to inquire about is just the nature of divination as a whole, because I don't think astrology was the first type of divination that we kind of dipped our toes in. But it makes me, the question that really bugs me sometimes is, why is that astrology became like, quote unquote, like the bigger one, like the one that we really have like a lot of documentation, and that's probably because of the astronomy too. But I think that because we're also talking about astrology as a form of divination, I think it can open the space for us to interpret astrology not just as like the study of the stars, but the study that there is meaning in every single time or every single event that happens. Because to me, at least, I think astrology, more than the study of the stars, is just a study of time. And I think that because we don't even know what time is in the first place, I think astrology is the closest thing that we can get to actually investigate what time is. Because I think if we are like these beings who are made to experience time or 1 second or 1 millisecond at a time, we will never get to see time as a whole. And I think that there probably is such a thing as time as a whole. And I think astrology is the one thing that can get us a little bit close to what time as a whole could be like, or what time as a whole can be. Yeah, I don't know
really,
where
really
I was going
beautifully
with that.
said. I mean, no, you don't need to be going anywhere because you were right there. I mean, that's the thing. It's an interesting question. Like, what is a second? Right. So now, what is a day And there's a few different versions of days, but what is a day is pretty easy if you go like sunrise to
Right.
sunrise or sunset to sunset. And that's a very astronomical thing. That's Earth spinning in relationship to the sun, right? What is a year? Earth orbiting in relationship to the sun, right? So we do have astronomical expressions of these two very important times of day and year. What is a month becomes a much more complicated question. We should see the moon and month, but there's different points of view, and we don't want to go there now, or we'll be talking about that for hours. What is an hour? Right now, that, as you know, especially in the study of traditional astrology, becomes a really important question. There's a very different expression than an hour equals 60 minutes of time, a so-called civil hour, but astrology should stay, in some regards, uncivilized. You know, what is a true hour? What is a 12th of the day? But why 12 anyway?
Right.
Right. So where does that come from? Is that because there's 12 months a year? But there's not. There's 12.37 or 13.37, depending on how you determine, you know, the length of a month. So time is this really interesting thing, right, in and of itself. And I agree that astrology probably, like you said, has either stuck around longer than other divination crafts or opened up more. It's also, I think, resisted by more students of divination because there's so many moving parts, right? And because it does require to do astrology, I think in a more total way, like also an intellect, not just the psychic side. I personally feel, and I see the ancients say the same, that like that psychic side is also very important. Right? You'll see astrologers, kind of like neoclassical astrologers these days, when people lead with intuition, say you might as well be reading tea leaves. I see that quote so much.
And what's the problem with that?
First of all, like, look, reading tea leaves is a sacred science and has ancient roots. And so you're offending something you don't understand. Number two, like, I think that for me personally, as like a counseling astrologer, like the chart itself is kind of a vehicle into opening the psychic or the intuitive field, and that's okay. And I'm actually like really feel supported in reading what some of the ancient astrologers, which these days I think there's this point of view that it was so like cynical and predictive and rigid, and that, I mean, it's more rigid, no doubt about it, but that doesn't mean it didn't have space for what we would call spirituality or something, or cosmology. Like, it's all there too, right? And I think that this kind of goes back to all things have quantity and quality, that even in astrology, there are the charts and the measurements and the things, but there's a whole nother side of it. And so oftentimes, especially since most of my clientele are either astrological students or practicing astrologers, we're speaking in the vernacular. And sometimes I can defend my statements by, see this alignment or that one, or in 1982, it was just like it is tomorrow, and what happened then, and all the things. But sometimes it's just like, I don't know where that's coming from, but it feels more true than anything else I've said today. So what is astrology, right? And in divination too, like, you know, there's this interesting thing I read in like the history of the zodiac, which is that like the quadrants may have been born through an old, I think, Mesopotamian practice of the
haruspices, I think it's what it's called, when they like chopped an animal into like 4 equal parts,
right? Or a part of an animal, and and read that. It's like, oh, okay, that's a strange, or okay, as below so above, I guess, like that's a strange origin for how we read. It's
actually a really complicated system too. I actually have a book that they translated, but I don't even know where it's from, but like they have everything delineated. Like if there is a scar in the stomach of a sheep, then the king will have like a female child or whatever. And they have like all these sort of categories. And I think it's interesting to see how that precedes astrology, and how he even probably brought a whole lot of that into astrology too.
And I can say it gives me the opportunity to report that I am entirely stoked that I don't have to sacrifice and dissect an animal every time I want to help a client help themselves, right? So, I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons why astrology has stuck around longer. Like, we can do it without getting blood on our hands, hopefully.
And I think also another thing too, if astrology really is a study of time, then I think that looking at planets and stars and things like that's the most regular clock that we have. Like an animal, like chopping an animal in four parts, like you can get all sorts of different variations. But
Yep.
with
I mean, in a
astrology, it
sense,
will always move, for the most part, at least in semi-orderly fashion, if
right.
not
On some
bizarre.
level, we're working with the same animal, right? So you take a lot of the potential kind of interferences out of it. However, this animal we are working with has so many animals. Now, I think one
Right.
reason why astrology has persisted, because I think that's a great and different and same question, versus other systems like Tarot hasn't been around as long. We don't really know,
Yeah.
right? But it's really beautiful and popular. And like I can walk around with a deck of cards in my pocket.
Hmm.
These days, I can walk around with like the whole of astrology in my pocket
Right.
too, thanks to the smartphone. And I don't need a gigantic ephemerides book. I do often like to say, part of what I wish to remind astrologers of is yes, you can see the chart, at least the visible planets in the sky. And so, what if all of our computers died? And can we still learn to read the sky and be able to do our thing? Because when that goes away, right, like the cards, or I don't know, like having to cut open an animal or whatever
Right.
it may be, might come around again. I would certainly rather read tea leaves, and there's plenty of them around my house because I
Right.
love some tea. Anyway, so in the astronomical thing, right, so the study of time, and a beautiful thing there, which I think astrology allows for, is a release from a linearity in experience of time, as we do
Totally.
from, womb to tomb, and aging in Saturn's realm of Chronos time.
Right.
And the past is the past, and the future is the future, and all that. And astrology offers more of the windows into Kairos, into cyclical time,
Right.
right?
And I love that you did mention the whole linear thing, because if we do have linear time, then there is no such thing as all of time, because time is just constantly just going forward. But I think astrology can give some evidence that there is an all of time.
I love in all of time. You want to say more about that? Because
Um,
I have like huge ears when I hear that beautiful statement.
I don't know. I think that if time really is cyclical, then I don't think that. Hmm. How do I put that thought? I feel like if time is cyclical, then there is such a thing as an end of time, because like a cycle will always have a beginning and an end, and then another beginning and another end, and another beginning and another end, and so on and so forth.
Oh,
But
right. But
if we
maybe
are,
the end is the beginning of the end of the beginning again.
yeah, but then in linear time, you just have a beginning and there's no end.
Hmm.
Or if there is an end, it's like a definite end, and that's it. And I think if
Right. Like
that
what
were the
happens
case,
when you die, or what happens when
right,
the universe does, right?
dies,
So,
yeah,
like exploring kind of, modern astronomical cosmology and this idea of what is the Big Bang and what came before did anything and where is it going, and is the universe eternally expanding, or will it actually reach a point and just stop, or will
right,
it reach a point and then start contracting, and like it goes out and comes back
right,
and goes out
like
and goes.
one big breath.
Right. And we can feel like the beauty in that. But if it's contracting, then do we experience time moving what we today would consider backwards or
Right,
retrograde? Or does it just all blow up? But as it blows up, something new is born. Right. And is
totally.
that okay? Even though that doesn't seem to agree with our nature of time. But we can see that the leaf falls from the tree to become compost for the soil of the seeds to
Yeah,
come. Right. And yeah, so all that kind of cyclical experience of time, which is just very ancient, because it is life. And it's not available to me in my stopwatch that I've got going here to see how long we've been rapping for,
nice.
right? Although I guess I could hit lap, right? And so that's an interesting thing, right? But when we study time astronomically, I mean, really importantly, it is therefore space time, right? And I
Right.
don't mean necessarily like in an Einsteinian point of view where time and space are intricately connected. But that's interesting because I think it takes us to another level if that theory is true. But just watching time as described by the periodicity of a planetary cycle. And for the sun, because of the Earth, yes, this is a day. And yes, this is a year, right? For Mercury, who basically rises and sets in the Earth day too, but Earth or Mercury's orbit of the zodiac or Mercury's dance with the sun, those are two very different things, are not a year. And what about Jupiter, who takes 11.86 years to get around the Earth's zodiac, or Saturn like 29.5 and whatever? What about these planets that we actually can't see with the naked eye? Uranus is actually right on the edge of that expression, but Neptune is like more than 150 years to get around. Like, what is that? And what about these great cycles of how Jupiter and Saturn align every 20 years, but about every 200 years we'll do that in a different element, etc. But as we start speaking that language, there's one thing I will say which kind of isn't in the right place, but I want to say it because I think it's an important truth. One of my principles is astrology should be a way in, not a way out, right? So if you're ever just in a place of needing the chart to tell you when this madness is going to end, okay, which is different than when do I get my stolen bike back? Okay. But, when is this going to end? Like, I think that's astrology is a way out. Even worse expression of astrology is a way out is, sorry, I'm not a nice person, but I was born with sun square Saturn, and Saturn's overcoming the sun and he's in detriment. And that's just how it is, So using our chart as a way out of bad behavior or justification thereof, right? Astrology is a way in, right? This is going to help me know who I am and look at some of the challenges in my life and navigate them in a better way and be a better person, right? Despite it all. Yeah. And we can also astrologize as a way out by, consistently running our computer software so that we are 85 years before now or 200 years from now and just try to escape this moment, right? But in this kind of cyclical awareness, right, we can get back in time and forward in time, and seeing these wheels within wheels we can bring us closer to the axle, can bring us closer to the spine of the moment now, right? And so we don't have to be running away from this moment by, muddling in the past or future tripping. Like, that can actually inform more of this moment now. But how many cycles do we need in all of those things? So that's also something that astrology is, right?
And just as you said that too, like, one thing that came to mind is like, what if now, like, if there is such a thing as just going back to the all of time, but like, what if now does contain all of time? And like, you can only see like one frame of it, but all of it is already in it. How does that change how we navigate life? And I think that astrology can help us get close to the answer. Maybe not answer it, but yeah.
I think that's beautifully important, right? So an expression I often offer is, speaking to a client and looking at their natal chart, for example, the alignment of the heavens around the center of Earth as experienced in the local sky in the moment of their becoming. This is a frame of the film. Right. And, the universe conspired, or however it works, for you to come in to be an expression of that one unique moment that will never, ever repeat in this way of planetary geometry and all the things that we call planets and signs and houses and aspects to one another, et cetera. And yes, this frame of the film is you, and it's a beautiful thing, and it is your truth, and go forth into it gladly. But also, it's just a frame of the film. So what is the scene? Like, let's zoom out a bit. What is the film itself? What is that genre of film? What is theater, right? I mean, like, you can go so far out and see that, for example, you and I were speaking privately, I guess yesterday or the day before, about the prenatal syzygy, about the full moon or the new moon that aligned before your birth. And what does that have to do with you, right? One thing I will say is it connects you more tribally, if you will, right? It's kind of coming out of you as a personal being into something that at least 2 weeks of beings all over the earth shared, Right. Well, what about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction before you were born? Now we're looking at 20 years
Right.
of folks, and where are you in that mix, right? And so we can get further and further out and further in, and it's not really necessary for us to leave Earth or the solar system to do so. We can add that, and I think it's intriguing. Importantly, the further out you go, the more that stuff's just going to work like a year.
Right.
Right. But when we come here and we watch the planetas, right, which are the moving stars, and see them dance throughout the zodiac, we have all of these different wheels within wheels and cycles of space time that help us, I think, know ourselves more. So there's an important thing here to state. And Jogee, we should just like return to this question. Like this should be what is astrology part 1.
Yes.
And
Totally.
we should have like a different journey in our next episode, which for folks who are listening, this is StarryTelling Astrology podcast with Gemini and Jogee, episode 1. We're probably at this original inception of this part of the StarryTelling journey come to you live every other week or so, every 14-ish days, a fortnight, that very astronomical part of time. And I think there should be plenty of retrogrades in our study of space-time together, and that this is this endless question, what is astrology, that we could take 17 hours to address.
Right.
I think that we've gotten into some of the very fundamental and core things, and egoically here on my solar return, at least honored some of the solar nature of astrology, and that sun signs, at least seasonally speaking, or sun aligned to a significant constellation, though I can't see it without burning my eyes, right? Which is an annual thing as well. Like that's part of it, right? Where the sun is, day or night, I'm just looking at this flaming red maple tree. I'm describing it in that color. Nice. That's the expression of its leaves right now, right? And that's like right here in the Bay Area. I will see it like that next year, right? There's this annual Earth Sun thing, okay? But then projecting that, right? And we hear more and more in modern times, modern astrologers describing these signs based upon a northern hemisphere experience of what it's like when the sun is in that sign of the tropical zodiac. And so Scorpio is the colorful leaves and the bare branches that they're falling from and all these things. Now, that's not what's going down in Brazil right now, very importantly, right? But it is an annual happening. Now, to say that, therefore, should be applied to a Scorpio moon. Why? Because the moon can be Scorpio when the sun's in Leo, and it's the middle of summer or winter, depending on where you are, right? It's not like the moon is going to make those leaves turn color and fall. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of foundation in this Earth Sun thing. And as much as I actually am equipped to resist sun sign astrology, because while it's a wonderful gateway drug into our craft, it can also very much limit you. Like you're not going to have the good trip smoking that weed, friends. Sorry, that's a stupid way, especially for a sober person. But anyway, there is something true there. Like, so when I'm speaking with this client earlier and I'm like, oh, it's the fall of the year and these cold, long nights, but it's the springtime of the day and the birds are singing. I can't do that with her moon sign unless I know the phase, because that helps me know where the sun is. So she, like I, was born at night and we are said to be children of the moon as our sect-light and all these things, right? And still, it's the sun that will tell me the season of the year and the season of the day. And for me to know the season of the year, especially, but both, I need to know where you're from and what it's like there. I need to know that Brazil operates in a different way than Chile, and especially than Toronto, which does it differently than Boston or the Bay or Timbuktu, right? And so there's something about what is astrology, because we need to address, for example, what are the branches of astrology?
Right.
What, because we've been talking somewhat, I guess, about experiential, seasonal, natural astrology today, space-time, cycles of time astronomy astrology today. We've also been speaking a little bit about natal astrology today, right? And how is the alignment of the planets at the moment of the birth kind of speaking towards I don't know, your fates,
right.
your journey. Like we need to get into that, right? And a question I think that is going to be very exciting for Jogee and I to address, another impossible question to answer,
Yes.
but there'll be a lot of that on this podcast. What is free will?
But also one thing too, like even talking about natal charts, like at the moment of your birth, that same chart was probably the inception chart of a business, or like a painting was just finished at that same second. Somebody probably asked a horary at that same second, and how is that moment in time like all reflected by the same chart? It's not just you, it's all these other things that also took place in that moment, that were also born in that moment.
That's a beautiful question too. I will look forward to dancing with. I mean, on some levels, I think you're being a little bit optimistic about how many things are created in the same moment from the same place. Sure. But philosophically, your point stands. But then we have to ask, what is the difference between a human being and a painting?
Right.
And is there a difference? Right. So in fact, is the human being already painted when they are born? So this is this kind of important question where I think Jogee and I have a different personal cosmology of in this moment of our lives, which is kind of like the quote unquote fate versus free will question. Right. Because we'll get into like horary astrology, or like the astrology of a question asked in a moment and the divination of its determination. And if you agree that I can cast a chart and find my lost passport, then what does that say about this world, quote unquote, right, live in? And then what does that world say about human existence and fate versus free will and all those wonderful, sticky, but lovely topics? And yet I think probably we've run our cycle today. Does that feel true to your heart too?
Yes, I feel like we did a good job.
Regardless,
some cliffhangers for the next one.
We got some cliffhangers. Always a thing. Leave them wanting more, and hopefully that was done, friends. And so, speaking of, if you did enjoy your journey today, please make sure you like this video or audio wherever you are hearing it, experiencing it. You should know in these days of the algorithm that your comments or suggestions are huge in promoting our work to other folks. I will say in that regard, you can find me personally at GeminiBrett.com with Gemini T's. That's 2 T's. Jogee, do you want to share?
Yes, you can find me at themercuryrising.com.
themercuryrising.com. Brilliant. And we look forward to journeying with you in the future. We'd love to hear your comments, your questions. We will find ways for those to come in. This is just the launch of the ship, which will find many planets, including courses and all sorts of things. So please stay tuned. For now, until we create a page for the podcast itself, which is underway, you can please sign up for my mailing list at GeminiBrett.com. Or Jogee, do you have a list at themercuryrising.com?
Yes, I do. It's
cool.
The same place, yeah.
So do that, and we will keep you informed about future happenings. But once this finds its way to podcast space, you know how to subscribe to it. You are a being of the modern age and all that. And we look forward to taking you on further journeys with us in the future. Everything that you just heard, if you're watching this live, will never be heard again, because it will be cut away from the kind of edited and professional audio version of this thing. In the future, we'll have like intro credits and probably outro credits and music by the wonderful sacred musician who is Jogee. So I encourage you to check out Jogee's work at the mercuryrising.com and to really explore his beautiful music too. It was one of the things that brought us together. And one thing that I really look forward to exploring with you, Jogee, is astrology in music and astrology too. I feel like there are so many things I wanted to say which were left unsaid. I imagine the same is true for you. But let's just say this, which we can edit in as the ending of a podcast on the audio version, which is, thanks so much for journeying us with today. Hey, no, wait, I'm going to try to say that again. Thank you so much for journeying us with today. Wow. Jogee, can you close us out? Because I can't speak English anymore.
Well, thank you for joining us today. It was a great time to be here. Looking forward to hanging out with you guys one more time.
See you in space.
Bye-bye.
Wow, I love it when I can't speak English. I'm trying to find the button that stops this